Hello everybody, Chris Van Meter here, still with Andrew Boswell. We are in the semifinal match of our Modern Open here in Charlotte, North Carolina. Bradley Carpenter is our 4th seed coming into the top 8 on Abzan Company against Bob Huang, who was our 1st seed on Goryo's Vengeance, and we are ready to see some battles.
Yeah, and Bob is going to be looking to have a really fast, explosive start. His is the faster, more powerful combo deck. It's also a lot less consistent. Bradley's deck is a lot slower, but his deck is more consistent. So I would say if Bob doesn't get a quick kill, that Bradley might be able to, is very likely to get a kill on turn 6 or 7.
So it looks like Bob is going to lead off with a Dark Six Shores and a Serum Visions, and with his Scry, he's going to go top and bottom. That's going to be a good start for him trying to sculpt his hand to try and win as fast as possible.
Yeah, both players are off to great starts. Bob, who recently added blue to this deck, this Goryo's Vengeance deck had been just black-red in the past. He's able to use that blue mana to have a good card draw spell, search through his deck, maybe find something that'll be a little bit more helpful, get some card manipulation. And Bradley, on the other hand, is starting with a Noble Hierarch, which is perfect because his deck is a little slower, and having that mana boost is a big deal.
Absolutely. So it looks like Bob is going to fix some of the cards in his deck. It looks like when he shuffled them, some went one way, some went the other.
Yeah.
He's going to go ahead and correct that for us. So I imagine with him fetching here to use 2 mana, it's probably going to be something along the lines of a discard spell. Oh, we do have a Serum Visions.
Yeah, and it looks like he just wanted to crack his fetch land before he cast his Serum Visions, just so he wouldn't mess up his Scry. And having this Faithless Looting is a perfect follow-up. If he had kept 2 cards on top, he would have been able to draw them immediately, which would have been really good.
So it looks like he does have a couple copies of Goryo's Vengeance in his hand, and he might be thinking about getting rid of one.
Yeah, he's got that World Spine Worm in hand, and if he just Goryo's Vengeance a World Spine Worm into play next turn and just crashed in for 15, that World Spine Worm would die and leave. Oh wait, no, it's not a legend. You can't Goryo's Vengeance it. Excuse me.
Correct. Plus, whenever it hits the graveyard, it shuffles into the deck. These cards are commonly played, folks. Don't be confused.
Bob's deck is quite the anomaly. It's a bunch of
Modern
cards that
All-Stars.
are not frequently played.
So
but this World Spine Worm is one of the unique ones.
So it looks like he is going to get rid of one of those Goryo's Vengeance. These players do have access to each other's deck, and it does not look like Bradley has any discard in his main, so he doesn't really have to worry about that other Goryo's Vengeance getting taken out of his hand, and he really is only going to need 1.
Yeah, for this game 1, it's just going to be 2 ships passing in the night. Neither of them are set up to interact with each other. Both of them are just going to be racing to a win.
So Bradley's just going to go ahead and fetch out a Forest, play a Kitchen Finks here, and he is already a third of the way to one of his combos.
So really what Bob's looking for is a Grizzlebrand and a way to put it in his graveyard. Right now he's got Nourishing Shoal and that World Spine Worm that we were showing you before. That is a way that he can gain a bunch of life without actually using any mana, allowing him to just draw wave of cards after wave of cards with Grizzlebrand, if he can get that Grizzlebrand into his graveyard and then Goryo's Vengeance it.
So Bob's going to go ahead and use his Polluted Delta here and search through his land for a deck and put it onto the battlefield. Looks like he's going to get a basic island. Now, again, with Bradley being a third of the way from being able to combo off here, this could be pretty scary for Bob. Something as simple as a Collected Company next turn, finding the right pieces, could just win the game. However, he did find a Grizzlebrand with this Faithless Looting, and he has a chance to just win the game next turn if Bradley has no way to interact with it.
Yeah, Bradley really wants to hit a Collected Company, like you said, find a Viscera, Seer, and a Malira, or maybe an Onofenza, and combo off. But it looks like Bob Huang is going to be able to live to his next draw step, and he may just take it here.
Yeah, so Bradley's just going to play a fetch land, cast another Noble Hierarch, crash in for 5 with his Kitchen Finks, and here we're going to see some fireworks. So Bob Huang is going to use a Goryo's Vengeance to put his Grizzlebrand onto the battlefield. I imagine we're going to see a whole bunch of cards get drawn here. Now, he does already have a Desperate Ritual in his hand.
Yeah, now this Grizzlebrand is a big game. This is essentially the engine of this combo deck. He's going to be able to pay life, draw cards, and then with Nourishing Shoal and World Spine Worm, he's going to be able to gain life and just keep drawing until he draws his whole deck, eventually gets Borborygmos into play, uses that to discard a bunch of the lands that he's drawn, and finish his opponent off.
Now he does have a Disrupting Shoal in his hand, so if he gets a land that he can play because he hasn't played a land yet this turn. When he casts that Nourishing Shoal, he can splice the Desperate Ritual onto the Nourishing Shoal if he wanted to, and be able to generate mana with each of these Nourishing Shoals that he's casting. But it's looking like he's not going to go that route.
Yeah, the splice into Arcane mechanic is something that I haven't really seen except in this deck. And it's kind of one of those forgotten mechanics of Magic. And this is one of the fun things about the modern format. It's such a big card pool that there's all these little Easter eggs if you go digging around through Gatherer.
So it looks like Bob is putting the cards into the piles as he's been doing, one of which is going to be for the World Spine Worms and Nourishing Shoals. One is going to be of which for his actual combo kill where he needs the Simian Spirit Guides and whatnot. And the rest is just going to be for the rest. So he did find one more part of his card drawing combo. He's looking for another here.
Yeah, and you can really see just essentially how broken and unfair this is. I mean, he just resolved one spell, Goryo's Vengeance, and with a little bit of setup, now he's essentially able to draw practically every single card in his deck, cast a bunch of spells without using any mana, and he's going to be able to just kill Bradley in this manner.
Yeah, so it looks like he's going to do it now without even needing to cast another Nourishing Shoal. So he played a land for the turn.
Man, look at this fistful of cards. I mean, it looks like someone who's searching for a fetch land, not someone who's looking through their hand.
Looks like he's going to cast a Desperate Ritual, cast a Desperate Ritual.
So a lot of red mana.
Use it through the breach, put a Borborygmos. And it looks like we're going to throw a bunch of lands at Bradley and get some attacks in. He has a 7/6 trample, which is kind of relevant.
Yeah, technically he does get to attack.
But that's 7 lands for 21, and game's over.
GG.
GG. Man, this deck looks almost as fair as Amulet Bloom.
Yeah. And I mean, you can really see kind of how the matchup is set up. Bradley had a window there where if he had drawn a Collected Company, he might have been able to steal the game. But Bob is typically going to be the faster deck. He's going to be able to combo off sooner. And Bradley's going to need a little bit of help from his sideboard to take these post-board games.
And now this is what we thought was going to be needed. Bob needed to take the first game because once we get to the sideboard, Pithy Needle is going to play a big role here. So on Bob's side, we have 3 Pact of Negation, a Boseiju who shelters all, a Rending Volley, 2 copies of Pyroclasm, 2 copies of Sudden Shock, 2 Painful Truth, 2 Shatterstorm, and 2 Inquisition. Do you think he's going to make any changes?
So the cards that he could certainly consider are Pyroclasm and Inquisition of Kozilek. The Inquisition of Kozilek would probably mainly be used to snipe something like a Pithing Needle from the opposing side. The Pyroclasm can be something that can buy Bob a little bit more time and perhaps disrupt Bradley's combo, but I don't think Bob is going to do that much.
As for Bradley's side, we have 3 Voice of Resurgence, 4 Pithing Needle, 4 Path to Exile, 2 Abrupt Decay, an Orzhov Pontiff, and a Scavenging Ooze. What do you think Bradley's going to do here?
So I think he can bring in the Scavenging Ooze as just a form of graveyard hate, although it's a little slow and it can be kind of hit or miss. The card that I'm really looking at is Pithing Needle. Pithing Needle coming down and naming either Grizzlebrand or Borborygmos, I think are Bradley's best ways of locking Bob out of a game.
Now Bradley is in 17th on our current leaderboard, which is pretty important considering he is now in the top 4 of this match. So let's go ahead and take a look at the payouts for this tournament, as Bradley is going to be guaranteed at least 20 more points and $1,000, which is pretty big game. But as we see here, they're all playing for that granddaddy big top prize, 5,000 smackaroos and 30 SCG points, which is, I mean, to be honest, the points might even be more important.
Sweet Star City cash and sweet Star City points. I mean, that's where it's at.
We got second place, $2,000 and 25 whole SCG points. Top 4, $1,000 and 20 points apiece, and so on and so forth, as we see there. So this tournament is very, very important, especially for these players that are chasing points like Bradley is.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a lot harder to get points this season. You can only get them at the Opens, the Classics, the Invitational, and also Regionals.
Absolutely. So Bob and Bradley are going to finish going through here and sideboarding. And I definitely want to find out, how have you felt about the meta as far as everything has gone? Well, not just today, but just the entire weekend on this tournament. I feel like we've seen a lot of decks.
Yeah, we have. We've seen a really diverse metagame, which makes me think that Modern is very healthy. Some of the decks are a little broken, but you can see that even the really broken decks aren't super dominant. I mean, a lot of them, like Amulet Bloom, is one that we really didn't even see that much this weekend. We saw a lot of really proactive linear strategies, particularly when we were looking at matches on camera, but we also saw a couple really fair strategies, particularly Josh Cho. I mean, he just has one of the most fair decks imaginable, and he made an extremely deep run. And even in this top 8, you know, we still had a Jund player, we had an Abzan player, you know, we just kind of had a good, healthy spread, in my opinion.
Now, what do you think about this Goryo's Vengeance deck? This is something that kind of exploded onto the scene at a Grand Prix earlier last year. Saw a little bit of play here and there. I know some of the Pantheon members picked it up to play in some GPs overseas, but it really hasn't done much since then. And here we have Bob Huang coming back, one of the original designers of the deck, just running the tables at this tournament.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the thing that's interesting about the Goryo's Vengeance deck is, as an archetype, it's still kind of in its infancy. Even though it's using a lot of fairly old cards, Borborgamos has been in print for a little bit of time now. Griselbrand has been in print for a little longer. But this deck still has a lot of evolutions it needs to go through. I think it has some consistency issues, but when you see it do well, it looks absolutely insane. And you can see Bob have some really insane wins very early on, sometimes as early as turn 2, like he already had in this top 8. So I think the deck is going to require a little bit more refinement before we would want to ban a card from it or think that it's too powerful. But right now I think, you know, it's really powerful, but it's inconsistent, and there's kind of balance in that.
Now, I really like Bradley's Abzan Company deck, and this is something that we've seen quite, multiple times throughout the weekend, and it's something that the big champion for it has been Logan Mize. He's just been playing nothing but Abzan Company almost ever since Pod got banned. But this feels like a deck where it'll come in waves. There's just a bunch of people that'll play it. Some will do well, and then there'll be another small meta shift, and then it just disappears for a couple months.
Yeah.
Why? Do you think that it's just there's some metas where it's not very well positioned? I just think that the creatures that can attack and kill plus a combo kill on the back end is probably just something that should be good most of the time.
Yeah, it's definitely something that's definitely going to be pretty good most of the time. The one thing that I would say is it's particularly good in formats where the combo decks are focused on being a little slower, because the Abzan Company deck is kind of a slow combo deck. The thing that the Abzan, it sacrifices speed for resilience, and so it's really good at fighting through other mid-range decks. So if you're in a format that's dominated by mid-range decks and other fair creature decks, this Abzan Company deck is a perfect choice. In a metagame where you're focused on, or you're expecting to face a lot more fast combo decks, then this Abzan Company deck can be just a little too slow.
So it looks like our players have all shuffled up and they're ready. Bob Huang, who is first place coming into the top 8 on Goryo's Vengeance. Bradley Carpenter, who is in 4th place on Abzan Company, who is currently 17th on our leaderboard, is on the play for Game 2 since he did lose Game 1. And we see here Temple Garden, Pithy Needle. I imagine he's just going to name Griselbrand and just pass the turn and say, all right, Bob, show me what you got. So it looks like Bob's going to have to win here through the combat step.
Yeah, this is going to be really tough for Bob. There's still ways that he can win, but the core engine of his deck, which is essentially drawing cards off Griselbrand, has now been shut off. So Bob needs to do something that's going to be a lot more fair, which is just get a creature into the graveyard, use Goryo's Vengeance to get it out, attack once, rinse and repeat. And that is something that his deck is not equipped to do.
Now, with Bradley playing Pithy Needle on Griselbrand here, Bob's hand is 3-land, Goryo's Vengeance, Serum Visions, Through the Breach, Simian Spirit Guide, and Borborygmos. So he does actually have an avenue of victory if he can get a Borborygmos onto the battlefield with enough lands in hand to win. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, Bob can still do it, but it's a lot harder now. And I think that Bradley might even have another Pithing Needle. And if Bradley plays another Pithing Needle and names Borborygmos, things get even harder for Bob.
We call that the hard lock.
I mean, it's pretty close to it. He can still just kind of, Through the Breach and Goryo's Vengeance and just do normal attacks, but it really takes a lot of the power out of Bob's punch.
Now, Bob does have copies of Shatterstorm in his sideboard, so he potentially could have boarded them in. And he also has World Spine Worm, so if he's able to Through the Breach a World Spine Worm, that's pretty big.
Yeah, that is pretty big, but if it doesn't come quickly, Bradley is likely going to have a board that just can block a little bit, buy him a little bit of time, and Bradley's going to be able to combo off at some point on his own.
It actually looks like Bradley has 2 more Pithy Needles in his sideboard, so I imagine he boarded in all 4, and he kept his hand on the power of that to stymie Bob. But if he just has a bunch of Pithing Needles in land, that could give Bob enough time to get this World Spine Worm onto the battlefield.
Yeah, typically one of the big advantages of Bob's deck is that he's sort of able to cheat his mana and have these really explosive draws. But if Bradley isn't doing anything very much and Bob is able to just develop his mana, that kind of equals the same sort of thing.
So it looks like Bradley does have a Kitchen Finks in his hand that he was able to find. So this turn he's going to cast a Birds of Paradise. He's going to use his Windswept Heath to get another land, and I imagine he's going to cast this other Pithing Needle and name either Gristlebrand so that he has a backup, or Borborygmos.
Well, after having seen the list, Bradley knows that the only way this Pithing Needle can get removed from the board is with that sideboard Shatterstorm that probably hasn't come in. So I think Bradley can feel confident that he doesn't need to have a backup Pithing Needle in play on the same card as the first one.
So Bradley's gone ahead and got a basic forest. Looks like he's going to cast this Pithing Needle. We'll get word what it's actually naming, but I'd be willing to guess that it's Borborygmos.
Yeah, and Bob just nodded his head and said, sure, whatever.
Yep, and there's the World Spine Worm that he left on top. And at this point, Bob does have a plan. He needs to get that World Spine Worm onto the battlefield, attack with it ASAP, and make a bunch of worms. And it looks like he did name Borborygmos. So we have Gristlebrand and Borborygmos named with these Pithing Needles, just like we thought was going to happen with Bradley's sideboard.
Yeah, and Bob's got quite a few land drops. He's got that World Spine Worm in his hand, and if he can just get a hold of a Desperate Ritual, he could be off to the races with a lot of green creatures in play all of a sudden.
Yeah, so it looks like Bob did have a rules question away from the table. He's back. I imagine he was able to get the answer that he was looking for. And it seems that he's just going to draw and then discard that Borborygmos. So it looks like next turn he's just going to Goryo's Vengeance it and attack so that he can get some damage in.
Yeah, I believe Borborygmos has a trigger that happens whenever it hits the opponent.
Yeah, you get to reveal the top 3 cards of your library and put all land cards into your hand and the rest in your graveyard.
Yeah, so essentially Bob is going to be looking to Goryo's Vengeance, this Borborygmos, and even though he can't use the ability where he discards a card to deal damage to his opponent, he's still going to be able to attack with the Borborygmos and then essentially use it as a source of card advantage to get more mana.
This is actually really interesting. I think Bob has enough lands in hand to where Bradley might even have been at risk of dying had he not had that second Pithing Needle.
Yeah, I completely agree.
So here we have Bob has drawn a Faithless Looting after Bradley just gone ahead and used a Kitchen Finks. I think we're just going to see a fetch here and then a Goryo's Vengeance on this Borborygmos just to get Bradley down a little bit in life so that the World Spine Worm could potentially be a lethal attacker.
Yeah, and even though Bradley doesn't have much of an offense, Bob doesn't actually have a lot of time. With that Kitchen Finks on the table, Bradley can threaten comboing off even off of just one collected company. So we'll have to see how things go here and how much time Bob actually has.
Yep, now it looks like Bob does have a Simian Spirit Guide in his hand. So really, if he happens to hit something like Desperate Ritual, he can cast that through the breach next turn.
Yeah, absolutely, and that would be big game.
So it looks like Bradley's just going to take the full 7. We're going to get a trigger off of Borborygmos, revealing 3. He's going to get 2 lands, and that Spirit Guide's going to hit the graveyard.
So not only is this a good source of card advantage for Bob having just more land drops, it's also helping to fuel his graveyard, so he potentially gets more Goryo's Vengeance targets.
Let's see here. So Bob did already play a land this turn.
Yep. Well, I'm sure that'll just be a quick judge call and they'll resolve it.
Yeah, he missed his second land drop so that he could discard the Borborygmos.
So the players will sort this out and... Oh, so if Borborygmos is named with Pithing Needle, I guess that doesn't actually stop his ability because of the way that it's worded.
Yeah, well, there are multiple Borborygmos. There's the original one that was in...
Oh, did he name the wrong one?
I think he might have just said Borborygmos.
Wow. Well, Bob...
Yeah, so it sounds like he just named Borborygmos, not Borborygmos Enraged.
Wow.
And there is another Borborygmos who is, as we know, the leader of the Gruul clan, who was originally in Guild Pact, and it is legal in Modern.
Wow, extremely unfortunate. And you saw Bob Huang's face when he won. He just...
I imagine that was
kind of stole it. And
I imagine that was the judge question that Bob Huang might have had.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, that's A little anticlimactic, but still, good job on Bob's side. I mean, it really showed how he was able to win, even if it was just through one Pithing Needle, you know, on Grizzlebrand, and his deck still has a lot of action despite running into some hate early on.
Yeah, now, to be honest, even if Bradley had named the correct card with that Pithing Needle, he was still probably dead in 2 turns.
Yeah, a good chance.